I don't get what that's meant to represent. Oh well. Okay, let's see what we got here. Got a bunch of modifiers that allow you to shift. Nothing too complicated there. And then you're going to be shooting the top unit in the stack. If it takes a result, let's see. If it suffers an actual adverse effect, meaning an actual applicable disorder, not just a check for disorder. Okay, so let's look at our results here. D's are possible disorders, but capital D's are definitely disordered. If you were disordered and you get disordered again, you have a chance of routing. It's possible that you take a reduced result off here. I don't see it. Everything looks like disorder. I know how other ways you can become reduced, but yeah, it doesn't look like the fire combat table is going to do that. All right, well, that's what we got there. Hopefully we'll find some reason why this chart is as complicated as it is and why I penciled in other numbers and things, because they shouldn't matter. Okay. After you do any fire combat, the attacking player can shock adjacent units with any of his units. He doesn't have to do this. Now, for shock, the attacking player rolls a 10-sided die. This is going to be a 6-sided die for the main combat table, another kind of annoyance to the system. It's got a lot of little... why would you do that? And looks to see what the adjusted die roll is. Now, this is going to be adjusted by the odds ratio between the forces, and also by these, which sadly are not included on here. And this is something else. I might have another copy of that, of this part. The odds are going to be rounded, this is kind of cute, in favor of the attacker if he's moving, but in favor of the defender if this is a standing assault that's resulting in a charge. After a shock, all attacking units will check for disorder by rolling a die and adjusting the unit's melee modifier, adjusting it by the melee modifier. If they roll a 6 or higher, they get a disorder. And I assume that's a 6-sided die. They don't specify here. Just the die. Foot units can attack cavalry, in which case Cav could avoid the combat, or they could countercharge. Okay, let's go into more specifics on Cav charges. There's going to be 3 basic types of cavalry. Regular horse, which is almost everything in the game. The dragoons, who look very much like the hussars, but with dark horses. And it's hard to tell the dragoons from the regular units, too. It's actually harder than... it almost just looks like, that gun didn't get fully printed. So for whatever reason, the dragoons are the ones armed with swords, and the regular horse are the ones armed with what look like a carbine. And the regular horse is generally used to charge. They fire with a pistol. I didn't know they could fire. In fact, I thought only foot units fire. Yeah. I guess if they're without horses. Okay, dragoons are allowed to either mount or dismount. Their fire weapon is going to be a carbine, which will be the same as a musket for the game. And then we've got hussars, who are mostly used for firepower and pursuit. And they're very mobile, mostly used for pistols for firepower. My feeling is that this fire results table is largely an artifact of an earlier design of the game. One that probably kept track of strength points and allowed you to fire on the different strength point columns. It doesn't look like you fire your pistols as anything except in a charge. Okay. So there's 3 different types of cavalry charge, and each one is for various different, allowed for various different units. So let's go to the most extreme, which is the full tilt charge. This is only going to be used by the English. Horse has to start at least 2 hexes away, but not more than 3. Okay, I guess we'll enumerate them as they did. Then we go to the castle charge, which is going to be using the pistols. Here's where you get to fire. Okay, so instead of doing an actual real charge, you're going to be riding your cav up near them, conducting fire, and then I think you get to get away. We'll see how that works. And then fire move charge this is more what you see in, unfortunately you don't see the carousel very often in musket and pike, and it was very common then. But this is what you see the most in the musket and pike system, which is I pull my pistol out, I shoot you on the way in, and then I shoot you some more as we're fighting. Okay. This is not a full-on shock charge, though, and you'll see some subtle differences here. Okay. And it says see a rat on this one. And okay. So if you have a charge order in your cav, you must move 1 or 2 hexes forward. And by the way, lines are either infantry or cav. And you have some ability to shift units between lines, which is exceedingly important if you've got dragoons mixed in. Because if you want to mount them up, they got to be in a cav line, and if you want to dismount them, they got to be in an infantry line. So unless you had an all dragoon line, and there aren't enough leaders to afford that, you probably need that kind of flexibility. There are other factors to the flexibility that are going to be necessary too. So the game allows you to shift units in an unrealistic way. Chances are that Merleau's unit is going to all be under his command for the entire battle historically, but you have a lot of flexibility in the game where you can peel units off and give them to other commanders. The Bavarian command, the French command as a whole is more restricted in this scenario. Anyway, back to our charges. The full tilt charge procedure. 1 or 2 hexes. Thought it had to be 2. Over here it said 2. 2 or 3. Too bad that's not caught in the errata. And the horse can't change facing during the movement. Some limitations on terrain. The defending player can roll for each unit that's the target of the charge. He gets some modifiers to his reaction. And that's going to determine whether or not he stands and fights, whether he gets a reaction fire, and such not. He's going to stand no matter what. We're not going to see a concept of squares in this game. Kind of disturbs me. Okay. Units may change facing to use reaction fire or countercharge. It may just be that it's judged to be at the wrong level of detail to be covering squares. And that this kind of covers what would happen in a square when you're trying to form square. Units may change facing to use reaction fire or countercharge, but may only do so once. All right. Hussars and mounted dragoons can avoid charge by retreating. Mounted dragoons have to make a reaction die roll to do so. Then the charging cav is going to shock. This is forced to happen even if it ends up getting disordered by reaction fire as it comes in. The full charge tilt is going to give you a major modifier, +3 to the combat table. Unfortunately, there's no indication of that here. Maybe it's here. No, this is just the reaction table printed out here. So we're going to be referring to the rules often. Now wait a minute, I've got another. Aha! Here we go. Okay, so yeah, here we're going to have all the modifiers, etc. for a charge, and the reaction die roll modifiers are here as well. Hopefully that'll actually align with this as opposed to, say, the other charts, which may have been printed before the game was finally decided upon. After you full tilt charge, you're going to get a disorder result in addition to whatever else you got. Okay. For the carousel, you get to move forward, and this is going to be the 1 or 2 hexes as opposed to the 2 or 3. The full tilt is misprinted. There's an error there as far as I'm concerned. You're allowed to do the reaction and the avoidance possibilities, but then when the cav gets up there, it fires its pistols into their front hexes. And this is the only place where 4 strength point maximum fire doesn't apply. Carasoling cavalry can fire all of their strength points. Carousel fire is simultaneous with any possible reaction fire. Okay. So all cav can do this. And then the fire movement. This is used by the French, the United Provinces, but not their mercenaries except for their Danish mercenaries and Danish cavalry. And it can never be used by the English. The English can't do anything but full tilt. So, if you've got dragoons mounted, they get to fire on the musketeer carbine chart when they do a carousel. Nice? Maybe. It's hard to tell because honestly, the pistol chart hits high numbers more quickly. So it only takes 4 pistols to get me up to the same chart that it takes 3 muskets or carbines. Sounds like it's good. I'm getting my musket carbine chart instead of that, but no, I think it's assumed that the pistols are going to be fired at closer range and be more effective. I don't know. All right. So after you do the carousel, if you're not routed, you move 1 hex away from the target, changing facing as necessary at no cost. So you're going to be running away from them afterwards, which could be an unpleasant circumstance. It was not necessarily the best tactic in the world. Okay. The final option is kind of a mixed option where you get to fire and lock a charge at the end. And the movement will be the same as the carousel, not as the real full tilt. Reaction avoidance stays the same. You get to do the carousel fire, but you only fire at half strength. And then you get to shock, but you get no charge benefit. And the shock is counted as if it's a foot shock standing assault, which will require the horse to roll for disorder at the end of it. Okay. Defending horse that gets a countercharge result from its reaction gets to become the attacker. Although this combat is going to be resolved as part of the original attacker's phase, countercharging English horse get their +3 modifier. Others do not. Others will treat it as a standing assault. If the defender is being charged, countercharge is not possible. What? Oh, through a flank hex or rear. Yeah, that makes sense. Undisordered hussars and dragoons can try to avoid a charge. They can also, all cav can do this when assaulted by foot. Basically, you simply retreat a hex, although I believe the dragoons had to make a check for that, and you can't do it into certain terrains. If cav is attacked by foot, you can retreat. You could also roll on the reaction fire on the reaction table. And that might give you something. All right. Artillery, when their limb is drawn, they're all allowed to operate. You're also allowed to fire reaction fire if non-artillery units are in your reaction or during an assault charge or against enemy artillery that fire at you. The reaction fire can be even if you're not the one being fired at, if it's the top unit that's being fired at. It's not simultaneous. If the attacker is firing small arms, the reaction fire is before the small arms fire. If it's artillery fire, you take your hits before you do your reaction fire. Artillery is going to have range bands rather than actual strength points. I think canister is always fired at range up here. This is going to be your base range. And then, and don't ask me what those other symbols are. Like I said, I think the system was changed significantly from when the charts were printed on their hard cardboard. And then you get shifts against you if you go over your doctrine range, but within your max range. And it's going to be one shift per hex. Howitzers always fire on here. They're going to have some special rolls, obviously. All right. You have to fire via line of sight with regular artillery. And they give some line of sight rolls, and they're all screwed up. This is a problem that SPI had that Berg seems to carry with him for some reason. Maybe he means it. It doesn't make a damn bit of sense. For units firing at a different elevation, the following types block LOS. A hex of higher elevation than the lower level that's chosen, yeah. Woods or villages, yeah. Oh, no, that's not it. Yeah, I found it somewhere. It's this horrible, horrible wording. Maybe there's an LOS section that I'm not. Okay, a different elevation. Here it is. A hex of higher elevation than the lower level that is closer to the target than to the firing unit. It should be closer to the lower unit than the higher unit. If you're trying to represent lines of sight. If you've got something else in mind here, I'm not sure what it is precisely, because I can picture what you're talking about if it's lower and higher. But if you're talking about trying to arc fire upward and such not, one, I can picture scenarios where that doesn't hold up. So I'm going to go with what my intuition says and just say this is miswritten, as many rule books have been from the SPI era onward. And I almost get the feeling that Berg cuts and pastes the LOS rules for that error to just propagate again and again and again. Okay, let's talk about howitzers. Howitzers cannot fire closer than 3 hexes. They fire on the 3 to 7 range with no modifiers on the howitzer roll. And they can fire over combat units. Do they need a line of sight otherwise? Yeah, it seems like it. Okay. Artillery canister only affects the top unit in the hex. At all other ranges, it affects the entire hex. Every unit in the hex. Artillery have no shock strength, which means if you shock a unit of artillery that's not stacked with anything, it'll be eliminated. And if they're fired at disorder and D-2, what's that? A less likely chance of disorder, has no effect. D+, which is a higher chance of disorder or automatic disorder, is going to automatically flip the unit to the move side, not disorder it, but if it's already in the move side, the unit will be eliminated by being hit. We're not going to worry about battalion guns. They're not included in this scenario. I'll talk about them in the next one. But basically, they slow down the movement of a British unit. Yeah, we can talk about them. I'll ignore them next time. They slow down the movement of a British unit, and they add a die roll modifier to the fire. That's basically all that we have here. Okay, as you can see from looking at this, combat results are really just disorder. You can get routed by multiple disorder, and you can get reduced by a rout that caused problems. Okay, so if you rout, you're going to take an immediate retreat at the rout. You're going to take a retreat maybe if you try to rally as well. And if you fail to rally at the end of your turn, you kind of get a further rout movement. If a routed unit is disordered from fire or is shocked or charged, it's going to be eliminated. Gosh, these reduced units don't sound like, these reduced markers don't sound like they come. I remember seeing them in this section. It had to do with if you fail to retreat, you start taking them. An assaulting unit that's not disordered is allowed to advance after fire. As long as it's not entering an enemy zone of control. On shock or charge, if you clear the hex, you must advance, regardless of zone of control. You're allowed to make a facing change. If you are routed after being hit by cav on a full tilt charge, the cav will pursue you, and it will hit something. If you've fallen behind other units, it may hit the other units instead. We have leader casualty rolls. Here you actually roll a 10-sider and 6-sider at the same time, and if you get a 14 or more, you cause casualties from fire. Shock is a little rarer. This only happens if the shock resolution die roll was a 0 or a 9, in which case you roll again for that 14 or more. And if you're dead, you'll get replaced. All right. So if you're in command and given a rally arm order, the unit is rallied without a die roll, and I think it's fully rallied up to normal status. If you are in the R&R phase, you can rally by unit. You don't have to be in command, and your command presence is not considered. You roll a die, and there's going to be some small modifiers here. as to what you're near. And you've got to get a effective roll here. Now, it is very unlikely that you will get the worst status. So on an 8, you stay where you are and you get reduced. There is no reduced result on the combat table. On a 9 or higher, you become routed or stay routed, and you're reduced and undergo route movement. Now, my feeling with this was it was almost impossible. Shit, I hope that's not for me. It was almost impossible to get this highest value because you're adjusting the die roll by what? By these. Well, most of these are minuses. The only plus is the unit morale modifier, which is plus or minus 1. Maybe it's a 10-sided die? They don't tell you. I think it's got to be. Maybe this is in the errata. No, of course not. Yeah, I think that's got to be a 10-sided die. They're not good at telling you which die they're using here. There's definitely some issues with these rolls. Okay, how about breakpoints? There's going to be, just like in Great Battles of History, a number that's your target. I don't remember what it is for this scenario. And your casualties are going to add up to breakpoints. Eventually you hit that number. If you do, the game's over, you lose. If both people hit it at the same time, the game's over, nobody loses. It's possible you could end up with units that are kind of surrounded. And you're allowed to call for a parlay. If you draw their limb, or if you activate them with a die roll. At that point, you can agree to a surrender of the surrounded units. The basic idea of that surrender is the units are removed from the map, but the two players agree between them what the cost in army morale is going to be. So you can reduce the effect of the army morale loss for that. Generally, somebody's going to be getting a better deal, right? I don't know. But that's a historical thing that happened, and you may want to consider it. It would probably be hard to do in a competitive game because unless both people think they're getting the better deal overall. All right, Dragoons are able to mount and dismount at the beginning of their movement if they're under command. Hussars. Hussars are better at avoiding shock combat. If they move adjacent to a routed foot unit, they get to eliminate it automatically. And they can do this without an assault order. Anything can do it with normal orders. The Hussar stops movement, however, and they're not allowed to countercharge. And that's about it. There are some special rules for the Blit'em scenario. I'm going to withhold them until the beginning of the battle. And we'll load this up, and it looks like I'm going to have to piece this together into two, or else put it up online as two separate videos, which I may do. That's easier for me.